let me just do that.
Perfect.
Okay, so as I was saying, RDI comes from a different school of thought when addressing the treatment of autism, which traditionally it has been a behavioral approach. Basically, you know, ABA and all the other, you know, primarily ABA, but most of the other interventions, again, come from the school of behavioral psychology, which, as the name suggests, is focused on the external behaviors of the individual. Most people from that approach, they define autism by the symptoms the individual exhibits. You'll hear a lot of people talking about, you know, rigid thinking, self-stimulatory behavior, hand flapping, doorknob turning, lining up trucks, things like that. And that's kind of how that approach, you know, they tell you, behavioral programs are designed to help normalize the individual, help that child look a little bit more neurotypical. They purposely try to, you know, come up with drills to help stop the stimming behavior, you know, to help them, you know, break out of repetitive thinking, help bring them into our world. RDI takes a different approach. We are from the developmental side of psychology. We look at it as a, you know, what is causing all those things? You know, those really are not in and of themselves conditions. So we look at autism as more as a, you know, it is a, you know, and there's been a lot of research done into this. It is a lifelong, it's a neurologically based information processing disorder. And that's kind of key to understanding everything else that we're going to discuss in RDI. It really comes down to the fact that there are some innate, some inherent deficits within the individual, which prevents their brain from operating in a way similar to those not on the spectrum. Specifically, there's an underconnectivity to the dynamic brain processes, the flexible thinking, problem solving, you know, the ability to adjust to shift focus from one thing to another when it's appropriate, you know, how to take, you know, when they encounter a new problem, to take an old solution that they've used in the past to fix a similar problem and apply it to this circumstance. And there tends to be an overconnectivity to the static mental processes. Okay, we often see individuals on the spectrum often have quite a gift for static thinking. You know, we'll always see them on TV. You know, the 4-year-old kid who's memorized every president we've ever had. The 7-year-old who can do these incredibly high mathematical functions. You know, you tell them what your birthday is, and they'll tell you what day of the week it was back in 1978 or whatever. These are all static processes. These are all based on memorization of rote facts and rote things, rote processes like formulas and historical data and things like that, that they're able to commit. That is unchanging. It'll always be there. You know, the problem comes when you know, they're asked to use that information in a dynamic way, and that's where they have challenges. So that's why you see so many people on the spectrum who are so, you know, very obviously very intelligent and very capable, but do not survive in a social setting and work. I work with a number of adults who are very intelligent. Some, you know, I have one guy who's actually bordering on genius who I work with. Couldn't keep a job for more than 4 months, just because he could not work as a member of a team, work with another individual. So long and short of it is that the persons with, you know, diagnosed with autism, the main problem is that their long-term effect is that they're unable to attain what we consider an acceptable quality of life. Yeah. You know, they have challenges with, you know, employment. They survive, you know, no friends, or you know, they're unable to live independently, and that's where RDI comes from. It's more like, okay, instead of worrying about behaviors, instead of worrying about school academics, which is all static information, what is it that we can do with autism to help the individual attain a long-term quality of life? And that was sort of the starting point for RDI. Okay. So what do we, you know, it's helpful to define what we consider quality of life. And this is sort of this slide here is one of the impetuses for the founders of RDI to do, you know, undertake this task. When they started going to do research on RDI, they found out how little research was being done on adults. You know, there was a few interventions. ABA was around back in the early 2000s, but you know, once the individual aged out of the system, there was really very little information on them. One of the few studies was this one by the National Autism Society of Great Britain, which is pretty distressing news. Again, we see that, you know, this was about 450 individuals, all had attended at least 2 years of college. They're all over 18. They're 18 to 40, I think, and they all had a average IQ or better. And yet, of those 450, only 6% of them were able to maintain any kind of full-time job. Again, despite their level of education, and those jobs they did have were usually pretty, very low-end, repetitive, skilled jobs. You know, janitorial. Landscaping, food service behind, non-customer facing food industry. Only 2% of them were able to live by themselves, were able to, function enough to, rent a home, to manage a checkbook, manage bills and that sort of thing. Only 17% of them could name a single friend, somebody who they saw on a voluntary basis of their own age, non-work related. Who actually chose to be and interact with that person. And none of them had any kind of long-term romantic relationships. None of them had been married, out of that study at least. So this is just sort of the starting point. It's like, oh my gosh, forget the academics, forget the behaviors. What can we do about this? Where can we take this? What is going on with these individuals that they are not able to attain that quality of life? They're educated. We've taken care of that part. What is still missing? And that's when we decided to take a deeper dive into what we call the core deficits or the universal impairments. Again, there's been some research done out there since the founding of ABA about 40 years ago, which is pretty out of date, but no one had been utilizing it. One of the things the founders of RDI came across was the fact that they've really been able to sort of target, 5 specific deficits within those individuals who are identified on the spectrum that are pretty much universal across all of those individuals. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. A lot of them have co-occurring conditions, but there are 5 that we wanted to talk about. And those are the dynamic appraisal or dynamic analysis, episodic memory, experience sharing, flexible and creative thinking or dynamic problem solving, and self-awareness. So I have individual slides for each of those, and I'm going to go in a little bit of detail. Dynamic appraisal. It's basically the ability to, it's a matter of focus. It's the ability to take all the information that your senses are taking in and be able to sort through them and be able to focus on that which is most important at any given time. Here in the slide set, we talk about, the individual has trouble understand that environments are able to be analyzed in different ways depending on the moment. Priorities. What was important yesterday may not be so important now because it's too late or something else has taken precedence. That idea is very difficult. I see this in kids in school. They've become overly fixated on working on projects they weren't able to finish, even though there's no reason to finish it anymore. Well, I have to finish it. I have to follow through because meanwhile, in work environments, the ability to understand that, okay, there's a deadline for this one particular project that comes up tomorrow, and the other one is until next week. I have to move this one to the top of the list. Okay. And these bullet points talk a little bit more about more higher functions. Appreciating the dynamic nature of settings, people, understanding that different tactics may not work with different people. I talk about the one kid who was, he heard, he sort of observed behavior that was going on in the boys' locker room at high school, and then couldn't understand why that same type of behavior didn't work at work. Where he's working with females and a boss, a supervisor. There are certain things that are appropriate with some people that are not appropriate with others. Okay. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of your circumstances to continually update your strategies based on what's occurring at that moment in time. That's sort of repeating what I said, distinguishing peripheral versus central. What is most critical versus least critical? So all of that is critical to being successful in a social setting. The ability to be very closely connected to the one or more people that you're engaging with, and being able to adjust your tactics, your social tactics based on that. On a more fundamental level, this is the area where you see a lot of the sensory integration issues we see with individuals in the spectrum. They literally are unable to filter out all of the peripheral. I didn't know I was expecting a third. There was nobody. The sounds, the smells, the sights, the lights, this, that. It's very hard for somebody on the spectrum to discern, what is most important to focus on that point. And so they focus on everything. Everything is at the same volume. For most of us, we have the ability to filter out background noises. A car goes by in the street, or a stoplight changes green or red. We know what's important and what's not, and we're able to filter it out. Those on the spectrum have a great deal of difficulty in doing that. I've seen a couple of videos online that can give you sort of a somewhat of an understanding of what it's like to go, through a mall, for instance. But again, a lot of the hand holding you see was considered a behavior. No, it's information overload. My son does that. He has some sensory integration issues, and he would often just have to flush the toilet, he'd have to do one ear and flush it with his foot or something. There's a great deal of that, and that is the dynamic appraisal. That's the inability to process all the information that's coming in sometimes. So I just wanted to give you two levels of understanding on that, on the higher functioning and the lower functioning side. Okay, so that was dynamic appraisal. They also have a considerable deficit in their ability to encode and restore and store episodic memories. Episodic memory is distinct from autobiographical memory, which those on the spectrum tend to be very strong at, actually. They tend to be very capable of, they can give you a great detailed accounting of what they did yesterday. Okay. Episodic memory is more about the emotional meaning that you apply to to a memory, an event that happened in your life. The autistic individual could probably give you great detail of what his trip to Disneyland was like. As well, we parked in the Mickey lot, and we took the the Sky Tram in there, and we went to this street, we went to that ride, we stood in that line for 25 minutes, and they'll probably give you great detail on that, but they couldn't tell you, what was the most fun. What about Disneyland gave you the most happiness? Okay. So it's often episodic memory, and this again going back to this individual I worked with one time, Paul, who was very high functioning autistic, about 35 years old. Episodic memory is sort of, I've heard people call it sort of time traveling. It's the ability to go back and re-experience an event from your past, not just list it off, but to emotionally experience it. Imagine, if you would, Paul gave me this analogy. Imagine going to visit a friend you haven't seen for a while, and they, for some reason, they decide to break out their vacation photos, and they'll bring out the hard copy, or these days they probably just have it on their phone, and they're like, oh, dude, we went to the Grand Canyon. It was just stunning how beautiful it was, and how huge. and they have a bridge, a glass bridge you can walk out on it, and you look down through it, and you're absolutely terrified. Here's a picture of that. And the person is getting very excited and emotional. You can hear their voice change because they are actually re-experiencing that event. Meanwhile, you're just going to say, oh, okay. Nobody likes to see somebody else's vacation photos because they have no meaning to us. We didn't experience that. We didn't go through that. So we don't really have any emotional attachment to it. Paul just told me that's how it is for somebody on the spectrum. It's like, yeah, you can show us something, we can remember something, but we don't have any feeling about it. And you'll see later on when we talk about self-awareness, how that comes into play. It's important to understand that the prefrontal cortex is sort of critical in this function. Prefrontal cortex, of course, is that part of the lobe that sort of acts as like the what do you call it? The phone operator. I like to think of it as, have you ever seen those old movies when they had, the phone operator would have to pull one plug and put it in another socket and another one, and that's the only way to connect. That's sort of the function of the prefrontal cortex. It's job to communicate with all the other various brain centers. And as I mentioned earlier, that there's a deficit in that area of the prefrontal cortex to process all that information from the various brain centers. Specifically, in one of the areas that is particularly stunted is in the ability to access episodic memories. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead. Experience, sharing, communication. This is a big one. There's a particular challenge for those on the spectrum to, they don't have the capacity or the desire to connect with another person on an emotional level. Those that are verbal, we find out most of their communication is very, it's very wants and needs based. It's very instrumental. I want this, I need that. But experience sharing communication, that is the social component of communication. When we go out to, when you go to a party, you meet somebody, you're there to share a bit of yourself, and you're there to find something out about them. We talk in a way that's very non-demanding. We find out, we want to share things about them. We talk in very decorative statements that are very prompting and open-ended. Those in the spectrum tend to be very close-ended questions or demands, demand-based communications. Okay. Whereas we go to a party and we might say, hey, how do you do? I'm Pete, you're Dave. Yeah, where do you come from? Oh, I come from, raised in Rockville, Maryland. Oh, I worked in Rockville, Maryland. You must know Houston's Restaurant up on Rockville Pike. Oh, yeah, I went there. Yeah, I used to go there. I loved it until they changed chefs, and you start sharing your own experiences, your own thoughts, your own perceptions and opinions on things. It's a subjective sharing of information. Okay. Individuals on the spectrum have a great deficit in this, and I've got some videos to share with you later that demonstrate, even though you're maybe a highly functional, highly verbal individual on the spectrum, you may still have challenges in being a good communicator. Okay, there's a great misunderstanding of nonverbal communication. Most individuals in the spectrum, because they're very rules-based thinkers, they're very concrete. They think in absolutes. Verbal communication channel they become overly dependent upon that. Okay, they don't really understand that full communication is a broadband messaging system. When I talk to you guys, it's not just words that I'm communicating to you. I'm using vocal intonations, I'm using facial expressions, I'm using gestures and what have you. And at the same time, communication is two-way. It's a little difficult on this little screen here, but if I were in the same room with you, I would be monitoring you because you're giving me information at the same time, nonverbal cues. You're shaking your head or sneering if you don't quite understand something, or you're nodding and enthusiastically. You're giving me feedback. There's a feedback loop going on there, and that's communication. I'm watching you to monitor all the different channels of communication to get a whole message. sarcasm is a great example of how how challenging it can be for individuals on the spectrum. It's very hard to understand sarcasm because sarcasm is based by definition. It's your nonverbal communication is directly opposed to your verbal communication. Hey Jimmy, nice shirt you got there. Huh? Goodwill have a sale or something. Somebody on the spectrum would take that as a compliment. They wouldn't understand they were being mocked or teased or made fun of. Okay? Because they don't have that ability to understand non-verbal communication channels. They also have a great deal of difficulty in repairing communication when it breaks down. Communication is, we don't think about it. Most of us are pretty adept at it, but it's a very fragile medium of communication. There's so many different ways a conversation can go wrong. But we have to have the ability to recognize when the communication is broken down and understand how to repair that connection when it breaks down. There's a famous quote, I think it's Mark Twain, I'm not sure, probably a writer of some kind, but the greatest myth about communication is that is the misunderstanding that it has been achieved. Most of us spend so much time talking, we don't really pay attention to whether or not our message is being received or not. There's a lot of miscommunication going on in the world, and even for neurotypicals, that's a great challenge. But for those on the spectrum, huge challenge. So that's one of the things that we work on first with RDI is trying to help parents change the way they communicate with their child to help alleviate some of those symptoms we're seeing. Problem solving, dynamic thinking, being able to come up with new ideas for new problems that you encounter in daily life. Just trying to think of an example. I have a college-age girl that I was working with, and she, by habit, she had to drive. She lived off campus. She had to drive there each day, and she parked on the same street every day. But she was devastated one day when they were doing construction on that street, and the street was closed off. Very intelligent, capable girl, high functioning, could not solve that problem. She finally wound up just going home and missing her classes for the next week. Because she couldn't come up with the idea that, maybe if I could search around and find a parking space on another street, that might be okay, But she was just so stuck in that thing that they're very, again, rigid thinkers because they don't have the ability to think outside the box is a cliche term, but they don't have that ability to come up with those new solutions. Okay. That's basically in a nutshell. All of this is going to be talked about in more detail in future, but I just want to give you a basic idea. Oh, forgot self-awareness. As you learn more about these core deficits, you'll start to realize how sort of intertwined they are. Poor self-awareness is the inability to have a coherent sense of your own personal identity. Who am I? What do I like? What do I want to do with my life? Who do I want to associate with? What are my political beliefs? What have you? And you can see how a lot of that is driven by things like subjective, interpersonal communication. You can see how the lack of episodic memory can play into that. Hey, you want to go skiing this weekend? You like to go skiing? I don't know. Do I? I'm not sure. I've been skiing. I don't remember if I enjoyed it or not. I'm not sure if I want to do it. And that's sort of, those bits of self-awareness are sort of what drive us as human beings. Again, that's how you decide, what sort of career you want to pursue in life. What type of person, you want to be in a relationship with, either friends, platonic or romantic. Okay. There's some other bullet points here that kind of reinforce that point, but I don't want to, dwell on that too long. So those are the 5 core deficits. Do you guys have any questions on that so far?
I was kind of confused when I was looking earlier about the last bullet point about different strategies and emotional awareness. Like if you could flesh that out a little more. I'm sorry, which one?
Oh,
sorry, on this slide that we were just on. What type of strategies have you seen that people have struggled with, and how that kind of plays into the self-awareness?
What strategies do we deal with it, or are you looking for examples of?
I guess more things that you see and how that kind of plays into the.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, in a lot of the kids I work with, there's a great lack of motivation.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
You know, a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of passion.
Yeah.
There's guys who, and when they do find something, they stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where sessions come from. Yeah, they're usually just so either challenged or so bored by some of the other things they experience that they're, they don't really pursue careers in things that they like or they love. They pursue careers in things that they understand.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's a lot of individuals I work with who just become just fixated on certain things. You just fixated on certain games, certain activities. Video gaming is something I sort of liken to that. I've seen a great increase in video gaming passion. They say there's some illnesses. They're actually naming some of these conditions in the DSM-5 because people get locked in their comfort zone. Yeah. And they do that because they don't have what we call a growth mindset. They don't have an interest in learning new things. That's sort of, and that'll make a little bit more sense when you talk about the guiding relationship. Mm-hmm. One of the things we see lacking in children on the spectrum is the growth mindset, which is the desire to put yourselves in new and unfamiliar circumstances mm-hmm. in order to struggle with and learn something out of the experience. Yeah. Okay. They develop a sense of self. One of the key things is they develop a sense of failure, of incompetence. Mm-hmm. I fail at talking with people. I fail at working with groups. I fail at all this stuff. I fail at. I'm no good at. And so that's where we see, again, considered a behavior. It's more actually a symptom of a deeper problem. Mm-hmm. You see that withdrawal from society. It's not that they need to, but they choose to because it is so painful. Mm. To have to continually, insert yourself into social circumstances and fail at it. Yeah. Okay. They're self-aware, and all of us know, a negative episodic memory is much more powerful than a positive episodic memory. And so those, all those failures sort of, that you develop a database in your head of negative episodic memories, and you become very pessimistic. You become very insecure about yourself. Meanwhile, they have a difficulty in encoding and recording and being able to access positive episodic memories. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk, RDI, that's one of the things we're going to do with RDI is teach parents how to help their kids, first of all, succeed in certain challenges, mm-hmm. and then help them lock down, how to encode mm-hmm. those episodic memories in a way that they can actually be accessed at a later time. Yeah. We're actually going to try to help the child develop a sense of self, a sense of, I am a competent person. Mm-hmm. I am a capable problem solver. I'm a capable communicator. And therefore, I do not have to fear to put myself into unfamiliar circumstances. Yeah. Okay. I can see that. I feel like that's something happening to my brother. I feel like he's definitely one of those video gamers that's become something that's very safe for him and mm-hmm. a safe place. I can see it's a safe zone, and who doesn't want to be safe? Yeah, absolutely. It makes complete sense. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Anyway, that's one set of research that was being done and that I want to share with you. Another bit of research that Dr. Gutstein came across. He's a founder of RDI, but you don't need to commit that to memory. He came across an idea about the guiding relationship, which is a theory developed by Dr. Barbara Rogoff, who actually lives locally here to California. And I'll just read this off. The process by which children actively acquire new skills and problem-solving capabilities through their participation in meaningful activities alongside parents or other, more experienced mentors. Mm-hmm. This is a universal learning process. around the world, no matter what culture you go to. This is how we pass learning on from one generation to the next. Okay, think about the apprentice model that we used to have in this country 100 years ago, and still do to some degree. But 150 years ago, if your kid didn't go to college, you would, when he came of age, you would send him to work for a tradesman as an apprentice. Okay, I know that word doesn't translate to Indonesia, Ayati, but it's basically a young child would go to work with a tradesman. At first, he would watch to see how the tradesman did what he did, but be it silversmith, blacksmith, barrel maker. He would watch, and as he watched and started to understand, the master, the skilled tradesman, would slowly incorporate that protege into the activity, and just doing little things here and there, but just enough to get him to feel confident. And as that apprentice became more capable, the mentor would involve himself less and less. Okay, and that's how we build that's the learning. That's how we develop a growth mindset. I want to talk a little bit about the development of this growth mindset in neurotypical individuals, and then contrast it to what we see in autistic development. Okay. Gosh, these pictures are sort of distracting. Let me move that window. Okay. So when babies are born, they basically have nothing. They have nothing to build them on. Their mind is a blank slate. They do have some certain instincts, though. They do have a natural instinct to facial gazing. If you look at children, neurotypical children, you can see that they're not completely inactive there. They're what does it say? 3,000 hours in the first 3 years, just simply gazing back and forth at our baby. You'll see every parent doing this in the mall when they're carrying their baby around. They got it right up there. The face is here, and we we silly talk at them, and we make faces and do all that stuff. And that's soothing and that's comforting for the child. But that's not just simple, meaningless, babble. There's an actual learning process going on there. We're seeing a child actually learning the fundamentals of communication. They're watching this individual. They're learning from him. The giggling the child does. The child is a part of this. It's not just a passive partner. He's an active partner. The child is giving mom and dad feedback, giggling and laughing when they like something, or turning away, or crying when they don't like something. And from this, the parent knows how to, whether to continue what they're doing, increase what they're doing, or to abandon it. Okay. What this evolves into is a trust relationship between parent and child. We understand each other. The child understands that the parent, the parent backs off when they're doing something too threatening or too complex for the child, or when the child gets bored, they know how to increase the complexity of their interaction in order to challenge the child. And that's how, speech tends to evolve over time. Okay. It evolves into, and I'm going to show you a video here in a second of my own daughter. It starts with just googly cuckoo, and it evolves into things like peekaboo, tickle games, things like that. Want to give you a video example of that. I'm going to jump out of this screen for a minute. Where is my peekaboo progression? Okay. I'm going to share a different one with you. All right, so this is a video
Oh my goodness, so cute.
of my daughter. Yeah, she was a chubby cheek thing. Wrong one, where'd it go? But this is just, Macy was just starting the RDI program. She's 14 now, and hates when we show these videos. But this is her at age, I think 6 months or 5 months. Where are we? Actually, let me go back to the beginning here. So let's start off with, this is her at 3 months. And let's take a look at some of her responses. It's just me and her being together. Baby. Is the audio okay? Can you hear that?
More time. Yeah. It's a little bit faint, but it's you can hear.
Gosh, okay. Okay, again, so you have an infant there, a brand newborn, who doesn't really have the cognitive ability or the muscle abilities to interact anymore, but she's still being very observational.
Yeah.
You know, she's still watching me, she's checking in with me. You know, I say she couldn't care less because I wasn't in the RDI program. I didn't know much about infant development. But yeah, she's actually quite an active participant. She's looking at me, she's checking me out. And eventually, you know, when she, you know, like just like the apprentice who starts to feel comfortable, when she feels comfortable, she's going to start giving me some feedback. Okay. A month later. Peekaboo. Who's there? Peekaboo. I'm getting feedback from her. We've got it back and forth now, okay? She's playing with me. It's not just a passive act. She is giving me, we got a feedback loop going there. And she, you know, in a second here, she'll show you when she doesn't like it. Who's there? Peekaboo. So I naturally increase the complexity a little bit longer. One of these. Nose and little mouth. Who's under my hand? Okay, now what do you see there? I increased the challenge a little bit. I did a little bit longer than I did. And she's not happy about it. And she lets me know. She starts turning her body weight, trying to get out of it. So I know to modify my behavior based on that. And because of that, eventually we are going to develop a strong trust relationship between each other, where she knows I'm not going to put her in a situation that's too threatening. Oh, it's Emma! Peekaboo! Peekaboo! Look, we can actually see your neck for cheek. Okay, a few months later, we evolved the peekaboo game into, we introduced a third, you know, an outside object. We introduced this little blankie. There she is. So she is now, again, she's become physically involved in the activity. She actually has to, you know, I'm putting the responsibility on her shoulders to pull that blanket away. Where'd Emma go? Where'd Emma go? There she is. I'm going to jump ahead here. Okay, so up to 7 months now. Again, this is a familiar game between me and her. And this, we're going to throw a little bit of challenge. And I want you to look what she does here. It's kind of fascinating. You guys are familiar with the term referencing. You'll see her reference her mother when things get too challenging. Yay! There she is! She's adding her own elaborations now. She's extending the time that she keeps it on her face just to be more mysterious, and so it's more bigger yay when she finally comes out. So at some point here, I'm going to switch roles. I'm going to put the bandana over my own face, and she's not going to be sure what to do about that. Where is it? Now right there, uh-oh, she pulls her hand back. She says, uh-oh, this is new. This is, I don't know what to do here, but you know what? She doesn't back away. You say, okay, what can I do here? This is a problem, but I'll bet I can solve it if I put some thought into it. You know, she's got that growth mindset here. And I kind of goof. I do it for her at one point, but then you'll see in the next iteration. Hey, I didn't go far. Okay. Okay, so she has an idea, you know, because I modeled it for her. She has an idea. She says, uh-oh, here's how I could solve that problem. Let me see, I'll pull it, but she's still not sure. So what does she do? She looks at her mom. She references. Is this right? Do you think this is what I should do? Is this okay? And mom gives an okay, and
You can do it. You can do it, sweetie. Yay!
okay. So she solved the problem. And we spotlight that, we congratulate her, we applaud, hey, great, wonderful job. And so she ultimately is going to develop a sense of herself as a capable problem solver. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of gives us an illustration of what we're just talking about. You know, that those are the early stages of that guiding relationship. You know, we throw challenges at her, we take her to new places, you know, emotionally, and she doesn't fear it, because she knows that she trusts the guide that she's with will help her through that problem, help her navigate that problem. Okay. I'm going to go back to the slide, stop that. Back to the slides, yeah. Okay, so page 2 of that. So again, we saw with Emma, that's when the child starts reacting to the world on their own terms. We saw her starting to take control of the activity. She decided to add her own variations, doing things longer, slower, modifying the activity itself. As the guiding relationship develops, the child begins referencing the caregiver. Again, we saw that. And reacting to the world through that person's eyes. Okay. She encountered something new she hadn't seen before. She didn't know whether that was safe to do or whether that was the right course of action. So she went to her mother to borrow her mother's perspective. And mom told her, aha, yeah, absolutely. That's okay. Okay. That referencing happens when you have a strong guiding relationship between parent and child. By the end of their first year, infants, armed with a growing sense of their own personal agency, their own trust in themselves, and trust in their parent guides, they become motivated to look for new things. They become bored with repetition. They decide to seek out new opportunities that are going to challenge them mentally, that are going to help them grow. And they become very enthusiastically accepting of their parents' initiations to get engaged with new things. Bring a new toy, and the child becomes, okay, what do you got there, mom? We'll try it out. And it's a very positive engagement for both parent and child. Okay. Again, I want to go ahead and contrast this now. We're going to talk about the pathogenesis of autistic development in autistic individuals. Again, this is based on some of the not Dr. Gussing's research, but this is based on research of another whose name escapes me. But this is, as we understand it today, this is the developmental track individuals on the autism spectrum tend to follow. Primarily, there are some innate genetic vulnerabilities to each individual born on the spectrum that are not really visible at birth, but they are nonetheless inherent in the individual. We talked about the core deficits. When those start to come into play is during the course of that the development of that guiding relationship. We talked about the combination of vulnerabilities reach a certain threshold. If the child does not have the ability to understand nonverbal communication, experience sharing communication, well, then they're not going to be giving their parents any feedback. They're not going to be giggling, smiling, nodding, and all that stuff. And the parent not having what they need to do to be a good guide, they tend to their default for all of us, not they, all of us, because I do the same with my kids, is become much more imperative, much more demanding of the child. It usually, we talk about late onset autism as something that comes on late. Well, no, it's just that by 18 to 24 months, that is the time where we are starting to become, increase our expectations of the child. We expect them to be able to walk by a certain age, talk by a certain age, and if they don't, well, then we start, we up our efforts. We starting demanding they say, come on, say mommy, say daddy. What is it? Is it an apple? That's an apple. What is it? And for a child who's not equipped to respond to those sort of initiations, that's where they become very frustrated. They by the failure, they know their mom and dad aren't happy with them because they're hearing it and seeing it, and they start to break down. And that's where you see, the failure of the guiding participation relationship. It never forms because the child is feeling very frustrated, feeling very incompetent, and that's when you start to see that withdrawal. You know what? I would just rather not deal with it. Okay, and if that GR doesn't develop, then you've lost any ability for dynamic growth. You've lost the opportunity to develop that growth mindset, and from there, that's when you see the loss of a quality of life, because the individual is going to do everything they can to resist opportunities for growth. Because growth happens in novel circumstances. When you put yourself in an unfamiliar situation, you're faced with problems you haven't faced before, and you take on those problems, you overcome those problems, and from that you learn something, and you're ready to move on to the next phase of your life. Okay, that slide really deserves a lot more attention, and I'm kind of blazing through it. Did you have any questions there, Ayati?
No.
No, following so far? Okay. Victoria, you're with us?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it requires some more talking, but kind of limited on time here. So, they fail, and what happens is you see some responses to that repeated failure. You see what they call self-directed style of regulatory behavior. They're going to shut the world out. They're going to, crying, making themselves unavailable, withdrawing from relationships. Okay. They develop that self-image of themselves as incompetent. There's just no way. I hate people because I always feel miserable when I go with friends or with teachers or grown-ups, and they develop an absolute fear of approaching any kind of novel circumstances. Okay, and social isolation becomes their primary coping mechanism. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry, I'm hitting some wrong buttons there. I'm going to kind of skip this slide. You guys have it on that, you can look at it. But basically, this just kind of feeds into, where does that take us? How does we get from that, sense of lack of competence to poor quality of life? This just kind of links that. This is a slide we often show to family because this is sort of is a great illustration of why these things are so important. We took at the core deficits. You think about the lack of experience sharing communication, lack of problem solving, lack of episodic memory. This is a list of the top skill sets employers are looking for, and we look at the ability to work on a team, ability to make decisions, solve problems. It's almost verbatim, taken off that list of core deficits. All the things that you need to succeed in an employment situation are things that you're specifically challenged by. Okay, the ability to plan, to foresight, organize, prioritize, assess. We talked about dynamic appraisal, knowing what priority to take at any given moment. The ability to communicate with people inside and outside in an organization. The ability to obtain and process information. You got to be an original thinker. You can't just let Google do all the work. You have to think of alternative ways to get whatever information you need in order to carry out your particular job. Analyzing quantitative data, taking static information and dynamically coming up with a meaningful information out of that. The next couple are sort of strengths of those on the spectrum. The technical knowledge are related to the job. Again, understanding the repetitive, that's something that's more of a rote learning process. Learning the specific skill sets of the job. Proficiency with computer software programs, ability to create and edit written reports. There is a large amount of communication that comes even when you're communicating in written form. The ability to sell, influence others. Again, we're back to, if somebody on the spectrum doesn't have any understanding of what another person wants, they're going to have a hard time finding a solution that's going to meet their needs. Okay, so that's where we see the where the difficulties with autistic people finding employment, why we're seeing so many challenges there. So that leads us to the key question: what do we do about it? What can we do to provide parents a way for parents and their ASD children to form that guiding relationship where it did not exist naturally? Okay, and that's where RDI comes in. RDI is a tool designed to help parents reestablish, basically go back to those, building blocks and take a second chance to develop a guiding relationship with them, so they can develop a growth mindset. To live independently, you have to be of a growth mindset. You have to be the type of person who wants to put themselves into unfamiliar circumstances. Okay. Okay. Another concept we want to talk about here, and if you haven't figured it out right now, I'm just kind of going through some of the key bits of research that RDI is founded on. There's an emerging science called neuroplasticity that we've known about for a while, but it's starting to get a lot of press nowadays. If you follow that sort of thing, it's the understanding that the mind is a flexible organ that can be, and that its development can be manipulated by external experiences. The formal definition here: it's the ability of the brain to form and reorganize actual synaptic activities in response to learning or experiencing certain things. Many people have heard about stroke victims who, a certain part of their brain is damaged by a stroke and they've lost control of one half of their body or something like that. But through rehabilitation, they're able to actually rewire the human brain, rewire the other half of the brain that's not damaged to take over those functions. A person can regain use of their arms or their legs or their speech through therapy, because you are able to realign the synaptic connections in your brain to take over different functions. The brain can modify a lot of different wonderful things, and it's just starting to hit critical mass here. They're learning it. It can be used for a lot of things. Anything from like chronic pain. People who've had lived in insufferable pain for 20 years through development of neuroplasticity are able to rewire their mind so they don't feel that pain anymore. Their brain just doesn't acknowledge it anymore. So we came across that, about 15 years ago and said, aha, that could be something that can be applied to children on the autism spectrum. And that's sort of one of the foundations of RDI that we'll see a little later down the road. Okay. So those are just some of the key research elements that form the RDI program. And I wanted to share those with you. Sort of at the halfway point here. What time are we looking at here, by the way? Already looking at 5 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I've been talking a little bit. So I always like to throw videos up there because they can sort of illustrate some of the points. I'm looking at my videos that I have queued here, see what might be relevant. Oh, I know. There's one I wanted to share with you that sort of relates to what we were just talking about. We were talking about communication, and that's sort of one of the key things most parents want to ask about when they come on board is, okay, my child can't talk yet. He's delayed. What can RDI do to help my child out? One of the mistakes we make with a lot of other programs is focusing on the verbal channel, focusing on speech before an individual is ready to learn it. So I want to share a couple examples of that. First of all, let me go to let me do this. I lost my share button. Where are you? I got too many windows open. Okay, do this or that. Share, and then what I want to do is not do that. Where's my videos?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, don't tell me I just clicked. Sorry, Zoom has a lot of, here we go. So this is a video I like to show people just because it kind of does a wonderful job of illustrating the difference between communication and speech. Speech is a subset of communication. Okay, we talked about how children develop communication by looking at their parents, learning it, and eventually, when they start to feel capable enough at, they want to emulate that. They want to practice for themselves. And this is a great video of a couple of babies. This is on YouTube. You can access this. This is not one of mine. And you may have even seen it before. This is talking twin babies from a couple of years ago. It went viral because everyone said, oh, look at these two miracle babies. They're twins. They have their own language. Look at them communicate. So let's take a look at this for just about a minute or so. Okay, so a lot going on there. None of it's verbal, though. You know, these are two completely non-verbal individuals having a wonderful conversation with each other. They're communicating beautifully. And, you know, it's not miracle language. It's not secret twin speak. This is what children do. They're mimicking what they hear from their parents, hear and see from their parents. All those gestures, and you know, that's not inherent. That's stuff learned from mom and dad. You know, the shrugs of feet, and they're trying it out. They're just lucky that they're twins. They have somebody at the exact same developmental age as themselves to practice this with. Okay. Now, this is what has to happen. This is one of the foundational building blocks of communication. And if we're going to take a nonverbal child and try to teach him speech, you know, without going all through these steps, you know, we're setting them at a disadvantage. And you know, it's a false skill set. It gets back to how, you know, some of these behavioral approaches, they're mimicking, trying to get our children to mimic neurotypical behavior rather than teaching them a neurotypical skill. Okay. And let's see. I'm going to show you how that evolves with. I want to share another video with you, how it looks later on. All right. Where am I? Again, got too many windows open. I got too much going on. So there's one down. And then I'm going to share. Okay. So this is a video of another client of ours. This guy. He's 13 years old. He actually came to us many years ago. You know, Macy and I we start off in ABA for an ABA agency back in the mid 90s, and this was he was our first client actually. You know, he did very well in the ABA program. We lost track of him for a while, but then his mother brought him back to us a few years later. And I just want to give you an example here. You know, this is one of his behavioral sessions. And I want you to watch his style of communication.
Do you need something? When did you have a problem with your homework? I had a bad day. When you had a bad day, you had a problem with your homework? Which subject? Math. Sometimes I have a little really hard.
Nope. Where's one about marshmallow?
What's your favorite thing when you go camping? Why do you go camping?
Is there a way to make it a little bit louder?
Do you need something?
I'm sorry?
Is there a way to make it a little bit louder?
I've got it maxed here.
Okay.
I don't know if there's some way on the. Okay, well, in any event, this is an exercise where they're trying to make him become inquisitive, to initiate, to be inquisitive with other people, to initiate conversations. Unfortunately, they're doing it in a very static way. You know, he's got, you know, she's throwing out questions at him. But what is really fascinating for me to look at that is you know, his mental processes as she's throwing things at him. At one point, again, I don't know if you heard it, she asked him, "Oh, do you like to go camping?" And his answer was, "I like to roast marshmallows."
Mm.
And which is not really the question she asked.
Yeah.
It goes on to a few more questions. You'll see he's not really asking any of the questions. He's not listening what she's saying. He's not processing what's going on. He is thinking statically. He's got a mental Rolodex in his head, a collection of pre-programmed responses, and he's just going through his head and throwing them out randomly to see if they're acceptable or not. Okay? It's not really communication. He's not watching her. He's not understanding her. And he's not really getting what's going on. Okay? So I want to throw that out there just as an example of what we mean by, why communication is so important. To think of it as communication and not speech. Okay. What are your guys' time frame? Macy told me I had about between 60 and 90 minutes. Do you guys, Ayati, I see you're in the car there.
Yes.
I wanted to go for a few minutes more if it's okay with you. Are you guys okay with another like 15, 20 minutes? Another 15 minutes?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. It'll be
Okay.
okay.
You, Ayati? Or you got somewhere to be?
Huh?
15 menit lagi, okay nga.
Oh, okay, okay, it's okay.
Okay, all right. All right, let's go back to the slide set then. Boom.
Minta 15.
Close my presentation. Did I close my presentation? Oh, I hope not. Why don't I see my own presentation? That's weird. Come back here, you. No, not that. Ah, there it is. Okay, just wasn't front and center. Okay, so want to talk a little bit about the hows of RDI. I talk a little bit, very briefly, about the the reason for coming up with RDI. Now I want to give some of the actual practices of what we're teaching parents to do. Boom, boom. Now, this is something I sort of, parents who are looking for the elevator pitch, the short answer to what RDI is. We came up with this. Me and a couple other consultants came up with this elevator pitch, this brief, encapsulation of what RDI is, but it does require a lot of explanation of some of the specific terms in there. So RDI it's research-based, meaning that RDI is a program that's been developed based upon the most current research into autism, neurology, psychology, education. The behavioral-based programs are great. They're very effective. They're proven effective. However, the fundamental research that they were built upon is now about 40 years old. And we found out there's a lot more information, a lot more research being done out there, but no one's using that research for anything. Okay, so RDI decided, all the those things I just talked to you about, neuroplasticity, guiding relationships, core deficits, universal impairments. Those are all based on some of the most up-to-date research into the field of autism development. It's a parent-driven remediation protocol. It's important for people to understand that this is, we transfer our knowledge to the parents. We are not the actual instrument of change for the child. We are primarily working with the parents to teach them a specific set of skills that are going to help them remediate or provide a remedy for their child's condition. Okay, we do work with the children in the capacity of, when we're training the parents, we're going to work with the child. We're going to show parents what to do, demonstrate for them, coach them. But primarily, the program as a whole, it's a parent training approach. Okay, it's a protocol designed to establish the guiding relationship with an individual, and we talked about that. To help redevelop, that connection. And then once we've reestablished that guiding relationship, the goal becomes to develop that individual's dynamic intelligence, their flexible thinking, their dynamic problem solving, their subjective experience communication, and rehabilitate the core deficits of autism such they no longer present an obstacle to attaining that quality of life that we discussed before, you know, independent living, meaningful employment, relationships, that sort of thing, okay? So I kind of throw that out there just for those parents who leave halfway through my presentations. At least they have this one slide. They have a bit of an understanding of what RDI is, okay? Oh, why are you not? Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about this. I was going to skip it, but first step in the RDI protocol is to assess parent readiness to take on this program. If a parent is going to be the primary agent of change in the child's life, well, they need to be ready to take on this burden. And they're already dealing with a lot of issues right then. Most of the people who come to us, they've just received a diagnosis. You know, their life sort of collapsed around them. Things are not going to be how they planned at all. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of frustration. And we need to address some of those issues before we can actually get them up and running with the parent training program. You know, we talk about, you know, their crisis mindset. Most of these parents don't know how to deal with a lot of the behaviors they're seeing. Again, we talk about, it's not their fault. It's, you know, autism deprives parents of getting that natural feedback loop. The child is not giving them the information they need to become a good guide. So that guiding relationship doesn't develop, and there's a lot of frustration and anger and regret and bad feelings that come along with that. So we need to address that. So that's a deep area, a lot going on there. So I won't get into too many details, but just know that that's the first step of the RDI program is to address, you know, parent, how ready are they to undertake an RDI program. Some of them are in a great state. You know, the parents who come, you know, who their children are older, they've been dealing with autism for 6 or 7 years already, and they're typically in a much better frame of mind. You know, they understand that autism is a way of life for them now, that there is no cure for autism, but it's something to be addressed, and they're much more much more open to change, and much more stable emotionally, and able to become, you know, much more ready to become a guide to their child. And that'll become apparent why when I talk a little bit more about it. So we're going to talk about, you know, once we have that out of the way, then you know, the first step for the parent and child is to, you know, we address that guiding relationship. That's the first phase of the program. And at this point, we refer to the children as pre-apprentice. You know, and they're not ready to become good apprentices for us yet because they're still dealing with their own things. They're dealing with their own feelings of shame, of incompetence, their frustrations, and they're still, you know, not ready to let the world in yet. So I want to talk a little bit about the tools that we're going to use, and each of these deserves its own presentation. I apologize for the brevity of this, but I want to give you a little bit of exposure to it, and then we'll come back and talk more deeply about it in later sessions, okay? So we're going to talk briefly about dynamic communication, regulation, limit setting, and activity frameworks. So dynamic communication, we talked about that lack of broadband communication. That's something we're going to address here. But the first thing we want to address is anxiety. At the very beginning, I talked about autism as it's a neurological inefficiency in the brain. It's all the components are working, but because they are not communicating with each other well, it takes a little bit longer for this individual to get to where we are. And when the world is coming to them at a pace, you know, much faster, much more information than they're ready and capable of dealing with, well, then that causes a great deal of anxiety, frustration, you know, just, you know, and that is a difficult thing to deal with. So one of the first steps we want to do during the, you know, the pre-apprentice phase, the guiding relationship development phase, is to alleviate that anxiety, to help put that individual at ease. Okay. One of the ways we can do that is through altering the way we communicate with our kids. As I alluded to earlier, you know, the natural instinct for parents when they're faced with a child who's delayed is to take the approach of, oh, I have to do more of what I'm already doing. I have to talk to the child more. I have to talk faster, louder, you know, and maybe they'll start to get it, you know, and it becomes what we call a very imperative style of communication. You know, we make a lot of demands of the child. We you know, if we ask them a question, they don't respond in 3 to 5 seconds, we ask it again, and we ask it again, you know. What do you want for dinner? What do you want for lunch? Do you want a cheese sandwich or peanut butter sandwich? Which one? Which one? Peter? Okay, what kind of jelly? You want grape jelly, strawberry jelly? Which one? Bang, 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 bang. And it's just too much information. Again, Paul, with the great metaphors, alluded to, you know, if you've ever had a computer that started buffering in the middle of a project you're doing, our natural instinct is to hit the enter button 7 or 8, 10 times more, right? Bang, 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 bang. Come on, come on. Not realizing that that this computer now has to process each and every one of those extra keystrokes. And it's just more information to process, and eventually your computer just freezes up. Same thing with individuals on the spectrum. If there's too much information coming, they're going to shut down. Okay. So we teach parents how to adopt dynamic communication. Number one, slow down the pace at which you communicate with your child. Okay, nice and slow. Lots of distinct pauses between statements. We want you to reduce the amount of overall verbiage you use with the child. You know, don't repeat the same question 5 times if the child just has to process each of those 5 questions. Minimize the amount of words you use. Okay. Reduce the amount of imperative language. Same thing. Do not, when you place demands on the child, when you give them orders, which we tend to do, you're putting pressure on them to perform for us. You know, if you were to say daddy, come on, you can do it, say daddy, come on, say daddy. That's stress, man. And that's just going to increase that anxiety. In place of the imperative language, we're going to ask parents to adopt declarative language, primarily making statements that are more invitational in nature, more inviting in nature than demanding. Okay, we're going to utilize, oh, I see you left your coat on the floor. As opposed to, hey, pick up that coat and put it where it belongs. We're going to spotlight a problem for the child, and we're not going to tell them to do anything. We're going to encourage them, to invite them to do something, to take an action. Okay. Declarative language is much more, it's much less stressful for the individual to hear. And by the way, we're also modeling a much more natural communication style. We saw a lot of products of our ABA programs grow up to have very awkward communication style. All they could do is ask people questions, you know, question after question after question after question after question, because that's what, you know, that's how they were trained. And you know, nobody wants to go to a cocktail party and have that happen. Nobody wants to talk to that person. Declarative language is a much more natural, initiative, experience sharing style of communication. It invites social communication. We're going to teach parents how to use strategic pauses and hesitations where they communicate. Okay. We often don't give our children enough time to process what is being said or communicated to them. By putting heavy pauses in there, number one, we give them time to process. We give them time to actually hear the message that's being delivered to them. They have time to formulate their own perspective and formulate a response to give to that. Okay, that also creates what we like to call an awkward pause. You know, awkward silence, which, as we all know, human beings instinctively want to fill that void. So those pauses and hesitations invite our child to respond to us in some way without turning it into a demand. Okay. All right. We talked about reducing imperative language and questions and verbiage. In place of that, we want to increase the use of nonverbal channels of communication. Okay. Wherever a nonverbal channel of communication can replace a verbal, use it. You know, instead of saying I see, somebody asks you, where's my milk? You know, instead of just your milk is on the kitchen counter, it's I know where your milk is, and you use your eye gaze to direct their attention over there. When you're doing enough pausing and hesitating with your child, you're not giving them the information they need or that they're used to receiving. They're used to receiving, they become dependent upon being told what to do all the time. by throwing out declarations and then pausing afterwards and just doing nothing, the child doesn't have the information they need. The next instinct is to look at the individual to find out why they're not verbalizing verbally giving them the information they need. When they look up at you, you have an opportunity to teach them something about nonverbal communication. I see that. I see where your code is. Or, oh, I don't, some sort of verbal communication can be taught during that instant, okay? And eventually, when this happens enough, the child eventually will learn to become a close monitor of other people. They will visually be attuned to other people. Again, the classic understanding, we talk about lack of eye gaze, lack of eye contact in individuals on the spectrum. We know why. It's that core deficit. They just don't understand there's information to be found there. But if we can, give a great illustration of the value of nonverbal communication, well, then they're more likely to adopt that. They learn that, okay, it's important to look at people, not just to stare at them in a weird way, which is a lot of what our adults do, because they were trained to, eye contact, look at me, look at me. Instead of just meaningless eye contact, they're actually gazing at somebody else for the purposes of communication. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna get up against my time here. There we go. So regulation, again, a big subject. There's a whole section of itself. Just know that one of the tools we use to help gain trust with the child is we use regulatory patterns. Children on the spectrum are attracted to repetitive actions anyway, because they're familiar, they're comforting, they're a safe place to be. Whenever we engage with the child, we're going to try to apply some sort of pattern, some regulatory pattern to the activity. If we had more time, I'd give you videos on that, but we can do that next meeting. But just know that, passing something. If you and your children are doing the laundry together, I can, take an item from the washer, hand it to him, he puts it in the dryer. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Great. That's a regulatory. That's comforting. That's familiar. I can do that, and that helps put the child at ease, and it makes them much more willing to work with you if they feel that it's something they can be competent at.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Boom. Effective limit setting is a key element. Children in general, we've totally had to rethink our views on discipline. And, but first things parents are going to say is, that communication, that regulation is great. My kid, my kid's just going to run down the hall and hide on the bed. It's like, okay, well, we're going to teach parents how to set clear boundaries for the child. We're going to teach them how to initiate with the child in such a way that the child, is compelled to respond to you. Okay. We're going to help teach them how to alleviate the child's anxiety so they don't feel so resistant to begin with. Okay. Ultimately, we're going to teach the child some self-regulation, the ability to control their own emotions. Okay. And activity frameworks. RDI is based on, the administration of RDI is based on activities, a series of activities with parent and child. It's not done at a table and chairs. It's not done in an office. It's done while we're doing laundry, while we're making a puzzle, while we're filling up the gas tank at the gas station. Anything can be an RDI activity. It's more about the structure of the activity. Okay. It's about creating, and a lot of these other things are part of that, creating a regulatory pattern. It's learning how to what we call scaffold the child to be successful at a particular activity, how to provide them support to get through there. We're going to insert challenges in there. We talk about, oh God, so much information here. The Edge Plus One concept, which is in order to help manage the child's anxiety, we want to find their edge of competence. We want to find that level of simplicity where they can understand what's going on and then not be threatened by it and be willing to engage in it. If the child is not capable of doing, all the things involved with the laundry, we'll get one component of that.
Mm-hmm.
Just picking up laundry, put it in a basket. Pick it up, pick up a sock, put it in the basket, pick up underwear, put it in a basket. And then we find, once we found that edge of competence, we are constantly trying to push one level up. We're going to try to introduce some sort of level, a little bit of complexity, one level above their edge of competence, and see how they do with that. We will scaffold them, we will support them, we will guide them through this particular challenge so that they can overcome that challenge and feel successful, and then we will spotlight that moment of competence. We will spotlight that accomplishment to help them encode an episodic memory of competence. That I overcame a problem, I did well. I am a capable problem solver. So that's, you know, people think about, you know, when they read the RDI books, they think, oh, it's all about activities. Where's a list of activities that I can do? It's important to understand it's not about the activity. The activity is just a vehicle. It's the framework of the activity that's important. That's what's, you know, that's what makes the difference. That's what makes the RDI productive. Okay. So I briefly described the 4 tools that we use during the pre-apprentice phase, and I blazed through them ridiculously quickly there. I apologize to you guys, but I'm trying to wrap it up here in the time we have. You probably, any questions, immediate questions you have now about this, what we discussed so far?
No,
Ada
yeah.
pertanyaan?
This is exciting. Sounds fun. Excited to dive more in depth, but I don't have any questions right now.
Yeah, and again, each of those components all deserve their own hour-and-a-half discussion,
Yeah.
and we will do that at some point. But this is just more of an introduction into the, you know, I did want to talk about autism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, RDI comes from a different view of autism. It's more about remediating those core deficits of autism, rather than just masking them with, you know, with behaviors that look neurotypical. You know, we look at the, you know, core deficits, addressing the core deficits, not just managing behaviors. We look at a guiding relationship. You know, that's one of the key elements, because the whole first stage of the process is helping a parent develop a guiding relationship with the child. Once that's established, well, then we can become an effective teacher for that child. We can introduce new things to them, and they're willing to go through. And there's all sorts of things we can do with them once they have the guiding relationship down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's 90 minutes. That was a good bit of time. If you guys have questions, or if you don't, we can wrap it up here. Macy said she wants to send up some sort of assignment to you guys. I'll talk to her after this and see what that assignment's going to be. But look for an email from one of us on that. And I think Macy's planning to meet again, and, you know, either have you guys meet with either I or her about 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
Okay. How does that sound to you?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Is that another informational session or just a meeting about the homework?
I think it's more of an informational, you know, the homework will be involved, but it'll be, I don't know whether she wants to go deeper into some of these things, but there's a lot to go over.
Yeah.
I have like 5 or 6 videos queued up here, which I was planning to show you, but if you guys got to go, you got to go. But anyway, yeah, let's just do that. Let's wrap it up here. And then, like I said, we'll be in touch by email about our next meeting. Okay.
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 Ayada, you okay? You follow most of that? I know you were on the road.
Maybe in this moment I'm not good in English. Maybe not all I can understand, but I will watch again this record, and I will maybe I need to spend more time to translate it into Bahasa.
Sure. And if any, you know, again, we'll get into more later, but any questions you have for me, maybe you can type me questions, and I can respond that way. That might be a little bit easier to communicate that way.
I think maybe if I later, after I watch the recording, if I have some question, maybe I can by email.
Email or text me is fine. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good. Okay. All right. Well, you guys enjoy your weekends, and we'll talk to you more in the near future. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice meeting you both.